Okay, and I am here with Michelle Hurn, who is a registered dietitian, an ultra runner, and the author of the upcoming book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about that race that you just won before we jump into your story, because this is so
Oh,
exciting.
thank you so much. So yeah, I this is my first ultra run. I've done 12 marathons, and we'll talk a little bit more how I got into ultra running. But I had signed up for or my first ultra was supposed to be back in May, but it got canceled because of COVID. And then I had another ultra I signed up for that also got canceled. And then there was this smaller race that was happening out and right outside of Las Vegas, out of all places. It was a 6 hour run. So it was 5K loops. So you just do how far can you run? How many loops can you do in 6 hours? And there was 22-mile-an-hour winds, so that was a little crazy. The furthest I'd ever run in my life was 30 miles. But my coach is Zach Bitters. He's fantastic. He's the current 100 world record holder for the 100 miles. Just a really great human. And I'd done some really, really great runs. I'd done a 4 hour, 2 hour back to back, a 3 hour, 3 hour. So I felt good and strong, but you just never know. Like I've never gone that far and everything can go wrong with fueling, but I had a great day. It was kind of crazy because it got warm, then it got cold and it was windy. But yeah, I ended up running 44.63 miles over 6 hours. It ends up being an 8:04 pace for that time period, and yeah, took first in the race. It cheered, cried. It was afterwards. It was really cool. It's good to see all. It's been a rough year. I know it's been a rough year. I'm sure for everybody listening, just all your hard work pay off.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. I am tearing up. That's so amazing. I can't believe you can run average an 8-minute mile. I think that would be like my best ever if I trained all my life for it. So congratulations. That's really awesome. So why don't we talk a little bit about your health story? Because a lot of us who are in the health world, nutrition world, we have our own story. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm born and raised right outside of Dallas, Texas, in Plano. I'm the youngest of four girls. I have three older sisters, and my health story really starts when I was 12. I was diagnosed with anorexia, and very serious anorexia. I was almost 5 feet tall and weighed 57 pounds. For healthcare, um, people at my BMI was 11.7. And so I ended up being put in inpatient treatment for 2 months. And actually, I lived in Texas, flew out to Arizona, was away from my family. And I remember before my parents left, they told me to go sit in the other room. And of course, I'm 12, I don't really listen. I kind of snuck in, so I could hear what they were saying. And I heard the doctor tell my mom that, there was about a 10% chance I would survive. Like it just wasn't good. I mean, I was having heart arrhythmia, my kidneys were shutting down. And, I heard my dad say something and they said, well, if she does make it, it's not going to be good. Like she could have permanent, damage. She may not be able to grow and develop. And that wasn't good. I mean, obviously that was awful. But I remember when I heard that, this is something else I share in my book that, I wasn't scared. I wasn't sad. I was relieved. Having suffered, even at that very young age with anorexia, it took over everything I did. Every thought, every action. I was being bullied and abused physically at school, and I wanted hearing that it was almost over. I was like, oh, thank God, my suffering is almost done. And it's hard saying that as an adult because it's just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe those were my thoughts. But so I did go through 2 months in an inpatient treatment center, and I'm grateful. I'm gonna be hard on healthcare in my book and throughout this podcast, but it did save my life. I think for acute life saving things, healthcare is can be very good. Um, and then I came back. My next oldest sister was very instrumental in my recovery, just really encouraging, great, fantastic. And I wanted to play sports again. Like I gained weight. And so when I was in high school, my freshman year, I tried out for the basketball team and got cut. And so I remember asking the coach, like, well, what can I do? And they're, oh, you're going to have to go to PE. I was like, well, can I play another sport? But all the other tryouts had happened. And the coach said, well, there's this running thing. And I had no idea what running thing meant. Like I knew what track was, but I had no idea what cross country was. And I ended up doing it, and I fell in love with it. Like the camaraderie. I love to explore. I found out I had a knack for it. But unfortunately, my junior year, I started to get faster. I actually won the state meet in Texas as a sophomore. Um, I started thinking about scholarships, like, oh my gosh, maybe I could get a scholarship. And I got with a club coach that really encouraged me, like, hey, the leaner you are, the faster you'll go. And this is something like such a myth that I think a lot of high school women, I'm sure men as well, deal with. And so I was researching, how can I lose weight? And I discovered a vegetarian diet, and it worked. I just ate a lot of carbs, I avoided meat and fat, and I lost, 10 pounds. I was ranked nationally as a young person. But all of a sudden, I lost my period, started losing my hair. I couldn't sleep. I was anxious. But, just like so many of the things I've done throughout my life, I doubled down on the bad behavior. And I still ran pretty well. But then my senior year, I ended up just walking to class, stepped off a curb, felt a shift in my hips, and long story short, I fractured my pubis ramus bone at the age of 18. Got a DEXA scan and found out I had osteoporosis in my spine and osteopenia in my hips. And the 3 scholarship offers I had were pulled off the table. Obviously, I understand that, it's a business. So I ended up walking on to the University of Arkansas, though. I had a great time. I ran with them competitively, but I had one other stress fracture my sophomore year, and that would, end my collegiate running career. But I had seen, what nutrition could do. I believed in it. I knew this is powerful. And, I felt a little lost after having those injuries, but I was like, what if I could help people? What if I could, become a dietitian? Let's finish out my degree. Let's go and let's advocate. Let's help. Specifically, my goal was to help young people with eating disorders. So that was kind of the beginning of my dietetics journey.
Were you still a vegetarian when you finished school and went to college?
No, that's a great question. So on to the University of Arkansas, like after I had my stress fracture, I stopped working with that club coach and the coach in Texas. His name's Terry. And I met up with him, and he was like, start eating, and you're going to have to, you're not start eating and stop being so serious. Like, I was so just focused, it was stressing me out. So immediately got back to eating meat at that point. And I think that was what helped me at least be able to walk on to school.
Gotcha. So you went on to study dietetics. Well, let me just, address some things that you said. I was like really tearing up hearing your story about how at such a young age that you had all these struggles and body image issues that caused you to be so severely underweight that you had a 10% chance of survival. Like, what was the recovery of that like? Like, because it seems like you did well. So how was that for you?
I mean, it's hard. I mean, anybody who's struggling with an eating disorder, like that's my message now, and that's one of the chapters of my book is on eating disorders. Is there is
Yeah.
hope, and there is a beautiful life on the other side of this, but it is not easy.
Yeah.
It was really, really hard to face your demons and to fight, and once I started to gain weight, you're still struggling with that. It becomes your identity, this person, and you're just looking for something to control in your life. And I was, I really struggled as a young person, but I'm so grateful that I had all of my sisters at different points in my life have been incredibly wonderful and supportive. I've had many, many good friends, great coaches throughout my life that encouraged me to keep going. And it's funny because sometimes people say like, oh, running is just another form of, eating disorder. And for me, it saved my life. I had to eat to run, and I made some great friends through there. So
That's really
yeah, so
amazing.
it's a daily process. And it wasn't really until just recently when I significantly shifted how I eat that I feel like my anxiety really leveled out, and my like lifelong body dysmorphia has definitely improved. So
That's great. Yeah, what a journey. I mean, it's so inspiring to hear, you go from this like sickly young child with all these, like my heart just goes out to you. Like I want to hug 12-year-old you so badly, and now look at you at this like thriving runner. So I'm getting like literally choked up. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you went, like what your experience in dietetic school was like? Is that what they call it?
Yeah. Well, I actually ended up doing my last 2 years online. I moved from Texas to, because like after like losing my scholarship was kind of like, oh my God, what do I do? Where do I go? I felt a little
Yeah.
lost. And so I did my last 2 years online through Kansas State University and got into the OHSU, Oregon Health Science University, dietitian. You have to do, once you get your degree, you do an internship. So and that was in Portland, Oregon. And initially, I went into that saying like, okay, I want to work with young people with eating disorders, and you get to do different rotations. And so I got to go to a eating disorder program for a couple weeks, and it was hard. It was really challenging, and I had to question, do I want to do this 8 hours a day? We actually had a young girl when I was there pass away. Like it was pretty intense. But I started to see things that I didn't necessarily agree with or like, but I was so new. I mean, I'm a student, right? But I
Right.
started to question, you see acute care, like someone comes in, they've had a car accident, or somebody has a small bowel obstruction, meaning like something's blocked in their intestine. And we put them on tube feeding formulas. And I would look at these ingredients and ask my teachers, my dietitians, and be like, I don't think that corn syrup should be the first ingredient. Like, why don't, and at that time in Europe, they used fish oils, and we didn't have any type of oil, healthy oils. We had canola oils and corn oils. And I was just told, like, look, it's fine. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. And then we would go and look at diabetic patients, and we were feeding our diabetic patients these consistent carbohydrate diets. But we would give them, they could have whatever they want as long as it fit into their carbs. For example, they could have 75 grams of carbs a meal, but they could have a sandwich, a cookie, and chips. And I was like, I don't think if they can't metabolize carbohydrates, maybe we shouldn't be giving them so many carbohydrates. And I would just put these questions out there. And I was kind of pegged that, like, man, this Michelle is this difficult dietetic student. Like, she just asks all these questions. Like, look at the food pyramid. What's wrong with you? And so I struggled, and I pushed
Wow.
back, and I refused to be a member of the Academy of Nutrition. At that time, it was called the American Dietetics Association. It's the governing board of all dietitians. Because at that time, their number one sponsor was Coca-Cola. Now it's General Mills and PepsiCo, Frito-Lay. Not a whole lot better.
Oh my
But
gosh.
young, and you're in this new career, and you're trying to like make an impression. And so, my first 6 years as a dietitian, I actually worked more in like the supervisory role. I wasn't in acute care, and it wasn't until I went into acute care, when I moved to Boulder, Colorado, that I was just floored with how bad it is. Like, I was told, we're not here to really help the patients. We're just here to deal with their acute needs. If somebody is diabetic, they can figure that out on their own time. If someone has kidney failure, eat whatever you want. We are here to check boxes, get insurance reimbursement. And I struggled with that. And I struggled with seeing people really, have really, really poor health because of, these terrible guidelines. I
Yeah.
saw the biggest misconception, in my opinion. I mean, there's so many misconceptions, but doctors would often say, if these patients were just, if they weren't so lazy, if they would just move more, if they would just eat their fruits and vegetables. And my experience overwhelmingly was patients were trying. They were trying to follow these guidelines. They were eating the rice, they were eating the salad, and they were just hungry. I saw so many patients that were obese and malnourished, like they just didn't have any muscle.
Yeah.
And so I started to really question, like, what is going on? This isn't adding up. But it truly wasn't until I lost my own health and my running that I actually made a huge significant switch.
Wow. It's really astounding when you hear like the stories that go on the inside. And I was sharing this with you on a phone call that as a speech pathologist in the past, I worked in nursing homes. And I often, when you work in a nursing home as a speech pathologist, most of what you do is chewing and swallowing therapy, which is for a condition known as dysphagia, when you have difficulty chewing and swallowing. And so a lot of these patients, the job of the speech therapist is to go around and see if a lot of these patients are safe enough to handle regular food, and they're talking about the consistency. So when someone came in and they had no teeth and they had a history of a stroke or dementia or something like that, we would downgrade their diet, make it like puree or softer. It's called like a mechanical soft diet. But we had to bring them different trials of foods, to like graham crackers, jello, applesauce, apple juice, like cookies, anything, like sometimes sandwiches, bananas, anything that was like kind of soft. That's what we would bring them to try to chew. And so all these patients, most of them were diabetic. And I would ask the nurse, like, is it okay that I give this patient a trial of this? And knowing what I know now, I'm just giving these diabetic patients like juices and bananas and graham crackers. I feel so, I have all this like retrospective guilt knowing what I know now. And then not to mention all the patients who I deemed and like they should be NPO. And of course, like there's different swallow studies that would back it up, but like, so that means they have to be put on a tube and then they get the tube feeding. And I would read it, I'm like, canola oil, milk syrup, like corn syrup solids, and like this like
Maltodextrin.
skim milk, maltodextrin, a bunch of synthetic vitamins. And I was like, what is this? I'm like, we can't put patients on this. This is terrible. And I just, I didn't feel right about it. And so I just left the nursing home world. And and I started working with kids. And it was when I was in the nursing homes, I learned about like the paleo diet and all these things. So at the time, I'm just seeing this like huge juxtaposition of like what the traditional wisdom is out there, and seeing these nursing homes versus all the things that I'm learning. And all like I'm at the same time, I was like healing myself with food and switching to real food, getting off processed food. And I was just like, oh my gosh, everything they're doing is wrong. And I just felt so helpless. So I had to leave. But yeah, so I know that I think it's great that you're like, no, I'm not going to be a part of this, like this academy that is sponsored by all these processed food companies, and they still are, right? You said
Oh yeah.
yeah.
It's they're still sponsored by Pepsi, General Mills, Abbott, who makes, all the Ensure and all that stuff. It was funny at the big conference there, Fancy is the food nutrition conference, that one of the sponsors was GlaxoSmithKline. I'm like, you're sponsored by someone who makes diabetic drugs? Like, are we have a conflict of interest here? Like, and what's interesting, just like many healthcare providers, dietitians, nurses that I've talked to say very similar things to you. Like when I pointed out, they'll say like, yeah, I don't like this. It hurts my soul, but I don't know what to do. Like I've tried, because you can't really, and maybe I'm wrong, but for me, I couldn't change it from the inside. There's so much money and there's so much power behind all these companies.
Hmm.
And I know Sean Baker, who he's written the book The Carnivore Diet. He calls healthcare disease management.
Yes.
Because you have to realize that, like, if we really heal somebody, like, their money is only made in illness. If you heal somebody, they're no longer paying money. If you end their life, they're no longer paying money. So, by keeping somebody in that cycle, we have clinical data. We have clinical data that you can get somebody off as much as 150 units of insulin in 8 days. People were resensitized to their insulin was resensitized, their body's own insulin and plasma glucose, in 2 weeks on a low carbohydrate diet. And we
Wow.
have people that 20 years diabetic, just, but you have to change, you have to be able to move and shift. And, I found that the more I advocated from the inside, the more pushback I got. I mean, I've shared another podcast, I've been suspended from, for suggesting low carbohydrate diets.
You were suspended for that?
Yeah, it's not in our standard of practice. Each hospital will have a standard of practice. And even if it could technically help somebody, I also in acute care was told, like, you're not here to manage their main need. If they came in with an infection, but their A1C is 14 and they're massively diabetic, you're not supposed to talk about their diabetes. That's not your choice. That's not your issue. So, once again, the system is not designed to really benefit the patient. And once again, this is not against any healthcare providers. All of us, in my experience, go in. We want to help people. We want to be there. Let's go. Let's help. Let's heal. But then, a lot of people don't have the correct information. I mean, a lot of dietitians believe in moderation, believe in a high carbohydrate diet. A lot of doctors and dietitians. I mean, I'm sure you dealt with this in your own when you were in the nursing home. You're given a lot of people to see in a relatively short period of time, and you have to
Yes.
chart on each. So you often don't even have time, you know? And so, so I struggled. And,
Yeah.
my story really started when I was training. I wanted to qualify for the Olympic trials and the marathon. My fastest time is 2:54, and you have to run under 2:45. And so I was training really hard, and I started to get like really sore, like unusually sore, and not
Hmm.
like just normal muscle soreness. And I talked to a few people, and I was like, what's going on? And I reached out to a few sports dietitians, and they were like, you know what, you're not eating enough, you're not getting enough carbs. I'm like, well, I'm eating 350 grams of carbohydrates a day. And they're like, no, you need to eat more. So I ended up eating 450 to 500 grams of carbs a day. And I got sick. Like, I would go out to run 2 miles and I would start cold sweating. I was waking up in the middle of the night with like my muscles were aching. I was having spasms. As you can imagine, I was not the kindest person to be around. I was constantly riding this blood sugar roller coaster. So here I am working with patients, eating this high carbohydrate diet, starting to just even question what I'm doing. And I had the kind of come to Jesus moment when I woke up in the middle of the night. It was like 2 a.m. and my muscles were just spasming. I hurt. So I drove to 7-Eleven, got 30 pounds of ice, put it in the bathtub, sitting in the bathtub, trying to, calm my muscles down with this ice bath. And my wife comes in and is like, maybe we should do something different.
I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
that gentle approach.
yeah. And so that's when I decided, like, look, I'm at that time I was 36. I'm 37 now. Like, maybe I'm too old to run. Maybe my body's just done. And so, I cried and I was told my wife, like, I'm just not going to run. I'm going to take a break. And at that time, I was also working at two different hospitals in Portland. I was working in a psychiatric unit as well. And that was another thing that was really challenging because I was seeing what we were feeding our psychiatric patients. And you and I have talked a little offline that this psychiatric patients are fed, it's the standard American diet. And you don't, in most hospitals, you get more of a choice, more of a select, but with psychiatric patients, some of them may not have the capacity to select. So they're just sent, the diet. And it has between 38 and 42 teaspoons of sugar every single day. Um,
Can
about,
you just say
which
that
is
one more time?
the
38.
psychiatric patients on average has between 38 and 42 teaspoons of sugar, the equivalent of 4 cans of Coca-Cola. And it's in desserts, in juices, and lots of processed breads and graham crackers, puddings, jellos. And most people think like psychiatric patients, like there tends to be kind of two categories of psychiatric patients. We think like, oh, the people are just depressed and anxious, like they're going to be okay. And then there's like really crazy people, like, oh, the bipolar, schizophrenic, they're not going to be okay. But the more research I've done, and Chris Palmer is doing just great work with that their diet, I think a lot comes back to the diet. Like, one of the theories is people with severe depression, severe psychiatric disorders, just like people with epilepsy, just may not be able to utilize carbohydrates and metabolize carbohydrates. Where if you have
Wow.
epilepsy and taking a lot of carbohydrates, you have seizures. Where if someone with schizophrenia, you take in carbohydrates, it's affecting a different area of your brain. And so the research Chris is doing, putting people on a ketogenic diet, these people with just lifelong debilitating conditions are all of a sudden able to function. It's fantastic. He's working towards funding a clinical trial right now on it, and I'm just excited to see. But I saw in the psychiatric unit, people would often, they're put on these drugs, they would gain weight with all the carbs. And the number one cause, well, I guess I should back up. First of all, it's just breaks my heart. Depression is the number one cause of disability in this country and worldwide. More people don't go to work because of depression than because of car accidents or recovering from injuries. We're seeing the deaths of despair have increased exponentially. What is deaths of despair? That includes suicide, but that also includes like drug overdoses, alcohol poisoning. And yeah, so much in my opinion, comes back to like, what are we putting in our bodies, right? What are we eating in a way that aligns with human physiology? How are humans supposed to eat? So, but once again, that's not something you talk about. That's not something the few times I brought it up in a psychiatric unit, it was like, well, who's going to pay for it? Well, who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? That's not our standard of care. That's not what the academy says. um yeah, there's so much resistance in healthcare. And oh yeah, and the number one cause of death in our psychiatric population is heart disease, which we know, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, has a close tie to diabetes and, consuming lots of sugar and carbohydrates.
Wow. Yeah, that is really, it is. I was just so mind blown the first time you told me that. And I feel like I'm just as shaken, like hearing it again. I mean, all this sugar, our patients who, I mean, I know that if I eat too much sugar, my mood worsens. I know that my wife, for example, like a major sign of her having, and I hope she doesn't listen to this, a major sign of her having like her blood sugar kind of being imbalanced or a blood sugar crash is that she will get anxious and irritable. And that is how it manifests. That's a first sign of it. So we know that there's these mood issues that show up if you are having blood sugar instabilities. And of course, all of the issues that like nutritional issues that can cause depression or contribute to it. I mean, there's so much, there's like that inflammatory model of depression. So we know that for many people, it comes from this being in a state of being inflamed. Our blood sugar can contribute to that. Processed foods really contribute to that. So we're not doing them any favors. We're just medicating them and feeding them what's making them sick. And we just try to keep them hanging on. So it's, I, I think the way that you talk about it is much more eloquent because I'm like in this very blaming language. So I'm just going to cut myself off. But
No,
it's, yeah, it's really upsetting to see and to not be able to make these changes. So tell us about, I guess, the idea for your book and tell us a little bit more about your book.
yeah. So, I guess it really started like kind of the idea, once I decided to give up running, I was like, well, if I'm not running so much, like, why don't I eat less carbs? Like, why don't I go and follow a ketogenic diet
Yeah.
and maybe I'll feel. And so I was doing a little bit of research and I came across, that crazy guy, Sean Baker, who just eats meat and that's it. And, I'm originally from Texas, so I'm down with meat, but I was like, that is nuts. I can't do that. But then I got online and I started researching and talking to different people. And I discovered Zach Bitters, who's a low carbohydrate runner. And I just got this idea and I was like, wow, wait, what? Maybe I'll just do that. Maybe I'll do that for a couple weeks and see how it goes. And my only goal, I was having searing muscle pain. I was like, extra protein will help. And of course, my wife, my partner was like, no, this is eating disorder. You can't do this. And we fought a little, well, a lot about it. But she was like, you know what? Go ahead. You're an adult. Do it. You'll quit in a few weeks. It'll be fine. And so, 3 weeks later, I was feeling amazing. My muscle pain was gone. I felt just happy. I was sleeping. My mood was better. And my wife was like, come here, I want to talk to you. And I sat down with her and she said, I don't know if I like this way of eating yet, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years I've known you. And at
Wow.
that, I was like, there's something to this. And so I really dove in and started researching. And that's when I also became very angry because I was like, what if everything I've known, everything I've ever been taught is purely to fund corporations and power? It has nothing to do with health of people. And so I started diving in and I started like really, I was like, if I'm going to write a book, I have to have the clinical data. And I was floored. We have lots of clinical trials specifically on diabetes and sarcopenia. And now we even have tons of clinical trials on heart disease. And the data suggests three things. Low carbohydrate diets work, are incredibly effective in reverse diabetes. Heart disease is not caused by saturated fat. In the absence of high blood sugar, the more fat, the higher your LDL is, it's actually better. And our protein recommendations are frighteningly low, especially for our elderly population. And
Wow.
so my book is divided into several chapters. I only wanted to write about things I felt I could speak really well on, and specifically diabetes, mental disorders, eating disorders, sarcopenia, and heart disease. And I've had a lot, I've had a lot of people request, like, I want to know what you eat for running. So I'll throw in a chapter about that. But I also have a chapter on where the nutrition guidelines came from. Because I think most people, like if you just ask someone on the street, like, hey, where did this come from? People would be like, oh, I'm sure it was scientists or health, but it has a long political, religious, corporate history. And I think if we can unpack that, and then I also think we do have to chat a little bit about, there's a whole book about this. So I don't want to rewrite the will, called The Sacred Cow, about the environment. What is
Yes.
meat and its effect on the environment? But I do think a lot of people don't understand like how essential, farming is, specifically regenerative farming. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that.
Awesome. That is so great. And your book is called The Dietitian's Dilemma. And I love that title. It's so powerful and it really speaks to, and I think we can all understand the dilemma that dietitians are facing because they are being ostracized and like canceled and, penalized for speaking out. And it really is these big processed food conglomerates and big pharmaceutical, big food, big pharma that are really controlling so much of pretty much all of like mainstream medicine. And so it seems like we're the radical ones by like only eating meat or like not really eating many carbohydrates. But what I think is radical is eating 400 carbohydrates a day for like a human being who like we're just not really built for that. I mean, I'm sure there's like a few people out there who thrive on that kind of diet. There's always this bio individuality, but for the average person, it just doesn't work. And it especially doesn't work with processed food. And that is what they push. And that's why they push moderation, because if your message is moderation, then a smaller can of Coca-Cola can still fit. And like a little bit of this processed granola bar is fine because it's, low fat and it doesn't have that many calories and it can still fit. And so many people, I'm sure every person listening to this podcast has experienced that moderation just doesn't work for most people. Like it might work for a handful of people who may have like this lucky genetics, but for the most part, we can't thrive on moderation with processed food, and I think that it's so interesting, all the deep dives that you're going to do in the book about all these different areas, like you already talked about with the psych patients, and how people with diabetes are really benefiting from a low carbohydrate diet. If you understand the physiology of the disease, how it's too much high blood sugar and insulin resistance, it just makes sense that taking out lots of excess sugar makes sense for the disease, right?
Yeah, and we're really going to dispel, I think one of the biggest things keeping people from high carbohydrate. Well, I guess there's a few things. One is people are very afraid of meat and fats. They're afraid that meat causes cancer. Fat will cause your heart to explode, right? People are also very much in love with all fruits and vegetables are good for you. Yeah, I was told as a young dietitian, you can't get too many of those. You can't get too many of those. And what we know is that unfortunately, a lot of plants cause a lot of autoimmune issues in people, whether that's inflammation, whether that's irritable bowel. People eating these huge salads and huge things of vegetables, and unfortunately, those also tend to crowd out a lot of those protein foods. You talked about a diet that's appropriate for humans. Humans, we all have species specific diets. It's really interesting. In my house, we've got kind of a mini zoo. We've got my dog sleeping here on the floor. We have a baby tortoise. We have chickens. The tortoise, like you don't feed the tortoise, chocolate. You feed it a very specific greens, very species specific diet, or it will get sick. Humans are the same way. We might be able to live eating bagels and donuts and granola bars, but that doesn't mean there's not consequences. We are really designed for meat and fat. That's the concept of bioavailability. We've done a terrible job in nutrition of teaching people about bioavailability. People think, I eat 14 grams of protein tofu and 14 grams of protein steak. Oh, they're the same, where it's not true. Your body can absorb the heme iron in steak incredibly effectively and the protein in steak incredibly effectively. Tofu has something called trypsin inhibitors, meaning that it actually has, things in this that prevents it from your body from being able to break down and absorb protein. And also, has other things like, estrogen and isoflavones, but same thing with like vegetables. A lot of people that follow plant-based diets want to argue that, kale is a great source of calcium and spinach is a great source of iron. That's once again, bioavailability. That doesn't show up on nutrition labels too, just so you guys know.
Right.
I've used the example in the podcast, if a cup of spinach, let's say, has 6 milligrams of iron, but your body can only absorb 1.7% of that, 1.7. That's the equivalent if I write you a check for $1,000 and you go cash it and they're like, she's only got $17 in her bank account. Like that doesn't really help you out. And spinach also comes with oxalates. It's like a bad relationship. It comes with all this baggage and it doesn't even give you what you wanted in the first place. So, that that, my health was transformed when I switched to an all meat diet. And I did that for 30 days. Well, yeah, maybe a little longer than that. And I'm not anti-carbohydrate. I'm a long distance runner. I use carbohydrates specifically. I think if we started talking about carbohydrates more cautiously and specifically, I think that's because most people will find they can tolerate small amounts of carbohydrates, especially if you're active or you're metabolically healthy. But the problem is 88% of our country is not metabolically healthy and 70% overweight or obese. So let's get back to being metabolically healthy, and then let's kind of figure it out from there.
Yeah, I love that. Great point about the how our body can just so much more easily absorb and utilize all the nutrients, whether it's the macronutrients of the protein or these micronutrients of like iron and calcium and vitamins. Like the classic example of the you look on a bag of carrots and it'll say like 240% vitamin A. There is no vitamin A in plant foods. There's only beta carotene, which is the precursor to retinol, which is the usable form of vitamin A. Our bodies are typically very poor converters of this beta carotene to vitamin A. So we think that we're getting all these nutrients because, like you said, that's what's on the nutrition label. So it'll just say, like, on spinach, it will just say like iron, this much percent, but it doesn't tell you that that's plant-based iron, like non-heme iron. And heme iron is the one that's more digestible and easier to assimilate. And we are an animal, so it makes sense that foods that are from animals or like animal-based foods have already the nutrients in the right forms that we as animals need. Plant nutrients are, in essence, I guess in general, a little bit subpar because our body needs to do some work to kind of convert a lot of them. And then it's competing with all these anti-nutrients that are in there. So for many people, it's not necessarily like, okay, I can't ever eat a plant again, but there are people who are thriving on carnivore, which is what exactly that is. And so some people do really well on carnivore, but then others use it as more of a therapeutic template and then start to add foods back in. They use it as an elimination diet and can kind of see which plant foods that they can add in and not have any, like, have the least damage done or whatever, however you want to word that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, no, that's exactly it. And I think that's, if and that was really my goal with the book, because I wanted to write something like, I was told people, where I have no stock in this, y'all can eat however you want, but I want people to know there's a better way. Like if you had told me, oh, it's been a little over a year, if you told me a little over a year ago, like, you know what, when I was eating 500 grams of carbs, if you had said, you know what, you're going to eat all meat and fat and you're going to become an ultra runner and you're going to write a book, I would have told you were nuts. But I didn't know. Nobody's told me like, hey, like, this can heal you. Like my anxiety I had lifelong anxiety, lifelong body. And I was always told, as someone who's recovered from anorexia, like, look, this is always going to be something you're thinking about, always going to be something you're obsessing about. And it's like giving me my life back. I don't think about food anymore. I don't worry about it. I get to eat what, nutrient dense, delicious food and move on with my life. Whatever your life goals are, only have two. Like I want to chase my passion and I want to help others. My passion specifically is distance running, and I want to give back, and I see this a lot in the lower carbohydrate, ketogenic and carnivore community, is like our health has been restored. And so it's like, okay, we got to get this message out. And, I encourage, and I love, and that's why I'm so grateful for people like you, is, the only way to do this. And it was what I believe. I don't believe we're really going to see like the top echelon healthcare being like, let's embrace this, because
yeah.
there's just too much. But I think we start grassroots and we say like, look, this is what's worked for us. If you are struggling, here's an idea, here's a suggestion, because often people will come to me and I get lots of messages on Instagram, just like, I'm hurting, I'm scared, or I've heard this too. I've heard that, meat is bad or fat is bad. So I think having a book and I wanted to make something that everybody, excuse me, can read, and it makes sense, it's easy to read, but also having the clinical data to back it up for sure.
Yeah, that's great. I am so excited to get your book, and I contributed a tiny piece of that, right?
You're in my book. I'm so proud and I'm so grateful to have your
Yay.
testimony. I want to have people too that like, that have their story and that are healthcare professionals, so your health coaches or dietitians, or that are ready to help other people. Because I've had people reach out and ask me like, hey, do you want to do coaching? Like, yeah, that's not my jam. Like I love you guys. I'm gonna let you, here's some people that really want to help you out too. I want to give you the information. I've got some, a few other things I'm working on. But yeah, I'm just super grateful for your testimony. We're gonna have, at least a dozen testimonies in that book. I had more. My publisher says I got to cut them down a little bit, but yours is definitely in there. So
Oh,
I'm
thank
grateful
you.
that they read it. It's kind of like, we have a getting started section, but also I think having a health coach or having somebody that, a nutrition professional, like, who do I reach out to? It's like, here you go. There are these people, give them an email. They're ready to get you going.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's great, the idea of the grassroots type of approach, because there are so many people who have found so much healing through this. And now that, keto, low carb, it's kind of a buzzword, but there's also so much misinformation out there. Like, I had someone say to me that they were putting Crystal Light in their water to drink more water because they didn't like plain water. And I was like, oh, well, why are you using the Crystal Light? And she's like, well, because she's like, I would use lemons, but you can't use those on a ketogenic diet. And I was like, who says you can't squeeze a lemon in your water on keto? Like, it just made me realize the level of, like, people just assume things and then teach other people that. And it is a little bit complex. There's no specific guidelines, and people are like, is this keto? Like, what should I eat exactly? Like, I have people asking me, like, how many times should I fast? 2 or 3 intermittent like fasting sessions per week? I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. And that's, unfortunately, a lot of it is really nuanced. And I'm constantly coming back to, like, you need to try things, like you said, just like, try this, see what happens. You need a little bit more, maybe we change it up, but it starts with just making that, like, effort to try something brand new. It might be scary, and having someone guide you along that road, because it's new and it's different. I mean, it took me a while to understand keto too, when I was switching from a paleo diet, which isn't that far from keto. So it can be confusing. And I think that's great that you have all these resources too. So,
Yeah. And
go ahead.
oh, God. Oh, I was just gonna say too that, like, I think another thing is we have to be really careful not to get too dogmatic. Like, I've had some people say, well, if you do this, like you said, like, you can't have lemons, you can't have this. Like, the whole goal is health.
Hmm.
There is no perfect way or right way. I even say, like, there's no perfect meal plan or right meal plan. How I eat is going to be different than how you eat, and how there's going to be people that need to eat way more than I do, that maybe have, especially if they haven't, people coming from maybe a vegan or underweight, they might need to eat much more protein, much more fat. There's going to be people that need to eat way less than I do. I take in some carbohydrates, some people take in no. But there is, I think we start with this foundation and then
Hmm.
we build out from there, right? And so, I really appreciate you saying that too. Like, hey, look, there is difference. There is some room here for nuance, and I also think, I've been running for since high school, right? And obviously I'm just transitioning to the ultra world, but I still have a coach. I have a coach, I have someone to guide me. So no matter how long you've been doing something, especially if you're going from a high carbohydrate or you're new or you're just confused, just having someone to help keep you accountable, I think, is priceless.
Absolutely. And one of the things you said reminded me of, like, a lot of people are asking me, like, oh, are you going to give me a meal plan? Can I have some meal plans? And I'm like, I don't want to give you a fish. I want to teach you how to fish. And I don't know exactly what your body needs, because we're all so different. And I feel like I'm one of the only people, I'm sure people get frustrated with my answers sometimes, like on Instagram. I'm like, I'm sorry, I just can't say. Like, I just don't really have an answer for you. And I'm sure they go to someone who's like, fast this many times a day, or like, eat exactly this. And that's what a lot of people want. But my approach is a little different. I like to guide you. I'll hold your hand, but I'm not going to do it for you. And so I think that it's really important that people feel empowered to make these decisions and be like, it's okay if I try something and it doesn't work. And it's like, keep learning, keep growing, and learn from people who you trust and are not sponsored by processed food
Yeah.
companies.
Yeah. Gotta trust it. You gotta trust, try and fail. Like, it's funny. I think sometimes I made a post about this not too long ago. We just put, like, this is the best of my everything on my Instagram. But, like, getting to this race that I just did, I have had so many nutrition mishaps. I've had times where I've had diarrhea, I've had stomach issues, too much fat, not enough. So, it's not perfect, and that's
Right.
okay. I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm moving, and that's the whole goal. Success isn't linear. We have to remember that it's like like the stock market, up, down, up, down. But the general goal is I want to be continuing to move forward. And I do think, like, yeah, can I give you ideas? Can I give you an outline? But I can't tell you like you need 6 ounces of meat, because guess what? You might need 3 or 4 times that. You might need, I don't know. I need to teach you, these are the fundamentals, and I need to let you be brave enough to tune in with your body and run with it, because that is where the power lies. Because once you do that, pretty soon you're gonna be, but if I tell you this exact amount and you try and it doesn't work, then you're mad at me and you're mad at yourself. So great
Exactly.
point.
Or after the 3 months we're done working together, what have you learned? Like, follow this
Yeah.
diet plan. It's not gonna, even if it worked then, it's not gonna continue to work for the rest of your life. Our bodies thrive on this variability and like this cyclical changing with seasons and perhaps our monthly cycle. And like, depending on what activities you're doing. So when you're running, you're not going to be eating the same diet as when you're not in your training. It's just our bodies need this variability, and people are just looking for that one answer. And I always feel that that comes with too much dogma and too much inflexibility. And health is a measure of being resilient. And so we have these ups and downs as humans with everything. And I like when you said that, we see Instagram, it's like the highlight reel. But there are times where I eat something, I had maybe too many carbs and I don't feel well. There's sometimes where I eat something and I'm like, oh, I knew I didn't tolerate that. And now I don't, I'm not feeling so great. Like, there's times where, like, we all make those, I don't want to call them mistakes, but like we have those moments where we're not feeling optimal. And those are learning experiences. So when my client inevitably tells me, like, oh my goodness, I fell off the wagon, I ate pizza or I had a piece of cake and I felt so terrible. And I'm like, good, I'm so glad that happened to you, because now you learned what that feels like in your body, and you're going to make a different decision the next time that happens. You might make the same decision, come to the same conclusion, and be like, I need to stop doing that. But like, it only reinforces this like better path. And that's what it's about. Like, it's not about eating the perfect diet that doesn't exist, but it's about finding what works for you and staying, open and flexible and learning and evolving. And so I think that your book is really going to help people, like, open, take this blindfold off. And you're going to reach a lot of people who are probably not familiar with this information and maybe not ready for it. But for other people who have family members who are still thinking like, oh, don't eat a lot of fat, or saturated fat causes heart disease, or I can't have too much protein. Like, I really think that it's going to be such an instrumental tool in helping to kind of re-educate people, because everything we've been taught has been wrong, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I just wanted people to have the information, to see a different approach, and to really understand, like, this is what this is, and this is why it could work, and this is how it could potentially, help with different disease states. And I definitely am expecting some resistance, especially from, the higher ups of the dietetic community. But that's okay. I think there comes a point when you have to say your truth. This is what's real and true, and you know, then my
Yeah.
goal is just to help people as possible.
Well, I really admire you going against the grain and like going up against the whole Academy of Dietetics and all their programs. And a lot of people, I had a friend of mine, her dad recently had a heart attack, and he was going to work with me, but was a little hesitant because he thought that I only worked with women. I'm like, no, women are just harder to work with because we have a lot of hormones, but but men are the easy ones. So,
Mhm.
but he like is kind of working with a dietitian, and it's going to be all the opposite information that I'm saying. So I sound like I'm crazy and coming out of nowhere, coming out of left field with this information. So I think it's really great to start building bridges to reach some of those more mainstream people. And so tell us a little bit about when the book is coming out, how we can find more of you. I'll definitely make link in the show notes so we can find you.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, so the goal for the book is going to be December or January. We'll see. We're kind of in the final stages. I'm very excited. I also, if people are familiar with Dr. Nevada Gray, the paleo pharmacist, is going to be doing the foreword. So I'm super excited about that. Yeah, and so if you can find me on Instagram Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. And that, I mean, I'm going to have all my information about the book there. It's going to be on Amazon. So you'll be able to link and get it on Amazon.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, and I should have a website up pretty soon. I've so much of my energy lately has gone into just finishing up this training for this race. So now I finally have a, a little bit of recovery time. But yeah, just I mean, follow me there. You'll get all that. I have a YouTube as well. You can see some videos and interviews I've done. But that'll be the main way to find the book is by following me on Instagram, and I should have a website soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. And those links will definitely be in the show notes. And when the book comes out, I'll put that link there as well. Thanks so much for coming on and for sharing your story and being so vulnerable and pushing boundaries and teaching us so much. So thanks for being here, Michelle.
For having me.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.